Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly through one of 5 nights at Freddy's most enduring mysteries, a tale of 2 incidents separated by 4 years, but forever intertwined in the minds of fans who've spent countless hours piecing together what really happened in those blood-stained party rooms. The Bite of 83 and the Bite of 87. 2 moments where childhood wonder turned to nightmare, where animatronic jaws clamped down on human flesh, and where the line between entertainment and horror blurred beyond recognition. One took a child's life in the golden glow of Fredbear's family diner. The other left an adult employee permanently changed during a birthday party at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Both involved animatronic teeth meeting human bone. Both sparked immediate closures and policy changes, and both became cornerstones of a franchise built on tragedy disguised as family fun. For years, the community debated whether these were the same incident or separate events, with theories swirling through forums and comment sections like ghosts unable to find rest. Markiplier's famous exclamation, "Was that the Bite of 87?" when witnessing the 1983 incident in FNAF 4, became a meme that captured the confusion perfectly. A moment of genuine shock and misidentification that mirrored what thousands of players were experiencing as they tried to untangle Scott Cawthon's deliberately cryptic timeline. The question seemed simple enough on its surface. When Phone Guy mentioned the Bite of 87 in that first game, that casual remark about how amazing it is that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, he planted a seed that would grow into one of the franchise's most analyzed moments. But as more games released, as more clues emerged from hidden Easter eggs and obscure minigames, the picture grew more complex. The television screen in FNAF 4, displaying Fredbear and Friends, 1983, seemed to settle one question, while raising a dozen others. If the crying child's tragedy happened in 1983, then what exactly was the Bite of 87? Were there really 2 separate incidents where animatronics bit someone's head? In a franchise where restaurants routinely covered up child murders and stuffed bodies into entertainment robots, perhaps 2 bite incidents wasn't so far-fetched after all. The more we learned, the more the 2 events seemed to reflect each other like dark mirrors, each revealing something crucial about Fazbear Entertainment's history of prioritizing profit over safety, of letting dangerous technology operate around vulnerable people, of brushing aside warning signs until tragedy struck. These weren't just random accidents or unfortunate malfunctions. These were the inevitable consequences of a company built on compromised foundations, run by men whose ambitions outpaced their ethics, using technology that was innovative but fundamentally unsafe. Henry Emily's springlock suits, those marvels of animatronic engineering that could function as both automated performers and wearable costumes, carried dangers that were known, documented, and deliberately ignored. William Afton's descent into murder and his obsession with remnant and possession turned what should have been simple family restaurants into hunting grounds. And somewhere in between these 2 men's failures, innocent people paid the price. A child who just wanted to survive his birthday party, an employee who thought he was simply doing his job at a day shift event. Tonight, we'll walk through both incidents in careful detail, examining what we know for certain versus what remains speculation, exploring the evidence that confirms their separation, and the theories about who was truly responsible for each bite. We'll trace the timeline from Fredbear's family diner in the early 1980s through the various Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations that followed, watching how each tragedy shaped company policy and influence the designs of future animatronics. We'll look at the suspects, from Fredbear himself, whose springlock jaws were never meant to close on a living person, to Mangle, Toy Chica, and the other candidates for the '87 incident, whose guilt remains unproven despite years of investigation by dedicated fans. We'll also explore why these two events became so confused in the first place, how the community's initial assumptions were challenged by new information, and why untangling FNAF's timeline requires paying attention to details as small as a date on a television screen or a number on a paycheck. The confusion wasn't accidental. Scott Cawthon built this franchise on layers of misdirection, on details that only made sense when viewed in context with information from completely different games, on storytelling that rewarded players who paid attention to background elements and obscure Easter eggs. The Bite of '87 was mentioned in the very first game, establishing it as a crucial piece of lore before we even knew there were multiple bite incidents to sort through. Understanding these two tragedies isn't just about satisfying curiosity or solving a mystery for its own sake. These incidents are foundational to understanding how Fazbear Entertainment operated, how their negligence created conditions where such events became almost inevitable, and how the cover-ups and policy changes that followed each bite reveal the company's true priorities. When we talk about the Bite of '83, we're talking about a moment that shattered a family and closed down the original diner. When we discuss the Bite of '87, we're examining an event that fundamentally changed how animatronics were allowed to operate, ending their free roam mode during business hours and marking another step in the company's slow collapse. Whether you're encountering these details for the first time, revisiting familiar territory with fresh perspective, or simply letting the narrative wash over you as a companion to sleep, this exploration will trace every thread we can, verify, acknowledge what remains uncertain, and piece together how two separate tragedies 4 years apart became forever linked in the franchise's dark history. These aren't just stories about robot animals biting people. They're stories about corporate negligence, about families torn apart, about warning signs ignored, and about how entertainment venues built on unsafe practices and covered up crimes inevitably hurt the innocent. So settle in as we examine the evidence, compare the incidents, explore the theories, and finally separate fact from speculation in the tale of the Bite of '83 and the Bite of '87. The foundation, Fredbear's family diner and springlock technology. Before we can understand either bite, we need to understand where it all began, in the golden glow of Fredbear's family diner during the 1970s, when two business partners with very different skills and very different ethics decided to revolutionize children's entertainment. Henry Emily, the inventor and engineer, brought technical brilliance and genuine love for creating joy. William Afton brought business acumen, charm, and secrets that would eventually poison everything they built together. Their partnership founded Fazbear Entertainment and created the technology that would eventually cause both bite incidents, the springlock suits that seemed like miracles of engineering, but carried fatal flaws from the very beginning. Fredbear's family diner was the origin point, the small restaurant that started it all before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza became a household name. This wasn't some massive pizza palace with arcade games and ball pits. This was a modest establishment, cozy and intimate, centered around two animatronic performers who would become icons of the franchise. Fredbear, the golden bear with the purple hat and bow tie, served as the main attraction and namesake. Spring Bonnie, the golden rabbit with that unsettling smile, stood as his companion. Together, they entertained children with songs and simple performances, drawing families who wanted something different from the usual birthday party venues of that era. But what made these animatronics special, what set them apart from simpler automated performers, was the springlock technology that Henry Emily had developed. These weren't just robots bolted to a stage. These were hybrid creations that could function in two completely different ways. In animatronic mode, the suits would perform automatically, moving and gesturing and entertaining children without any human operator. But with the right preparation, with careful winding of the springlock mechanisms, an employee could actually climb inside and wear the suit like a costume, controlling it from within to interact directly with guests in ways a standard animatronic never could. The concept was brilliant in theory. Imagine the possibilities. During automated performances, the characters could move with program precision. But for special events, for close-up interactions with children, for moments when the magic needed a human touch, an employee could step inside and become the character. The springlocks would compress all the animatronic components, the metal endoskeleton and wiring and mechanical parts, pushing them back against the interior walls of the suit to create space for a human body. When locked properly, when wound tight enough, the suits were safe to wear. The employee could move around, interact with guests, bring the character to life in ways no automated system could match. But those words, when locked properly, carried more weight than anyone wanted to acknowledge. The springlock system was inherently dangerous, a collection of compressed springs under constant tension, holding back heavy metal components that wanted to snap into their default positions. Every training tape, every safety warning, every careful instruction emphasized the same crucial points. Keep the locks wound tight. Avoid any moisture. Don't make any sudden movements. Even breathing too hard could be dangerous. Sweat could trigger the locks. The mechanisms were sensitive, temperamental, and absolutely unforgiving of mistakes. When springlocks failed, they failed catastrophically. The compressed components didn't gradually shift back into place. They snapped violently, with tremendous force, the springs releasing all their stored tension at once. Metal rods and beams and sharp edges would slam into the person wearing the suit, piercing flesh, breaking bones, crushing organs. The interior of these suits wasn't designed for human occupation. The space created by the springlocks was temporary, an artificial cavity carved out of a mechanical system that wanted to return to its default state. When that happened with someone inside, the results were horrific. Training protocols existed, of course. Employees who would wear the suits received instructions on proper springlock management. They learned to wind the mechanisms before entering, to check that everything was secured, to move carefully and avoid any actions that might loosen the springs. They were warned about moisture, told that even a small amount of water could cause the locks to slip. They were instructed on emergency procedures, though what you could realistically do if the springlock started failing while you were trapped inside a suit full of sharp metal components was never made entirely clear. The training existed more to protect the company from liability than to genuinely ensure employee safety. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie both used this technology, making them versatile but dangerous. The diner's small size meant employees regularly wore the suits for close guest interaction. Children could hug Fredbear, could sit on his lap, could get right up close in ways that would be impossible with a standard animatronic bolted to a stage. Spring Bonnie could walk around the dining area, delivering cake, posing for photos, creating magical moments that made the diner special. This personal touch, this ability to have what seemed like real interaction with the characters, gave Fredbear's Family Diner an advantage over competitors using simpler entertainment systems. But the same features that made the suit special also made them horrifying weapons waiting for the right conditions to activate. A springlock suit was a loaded gun with a hair trigger, and Fazbear Entertainment put the employees inside them daily, sent them out into crowded restaurants full of excited children and spilled drinks and unpredictable situations. The company knew the risks. They documented them in training materials. They created protocols meant to minimize danger. But they never seriously considered that maybe, possibly, the entire concept was too dangerous to implement. The business value outweighed the human cost, at least until tragedy forced their hand. Henry Emily seems to have genuinely believed his creation was safe when used properly. His technical pride in solving the engineering challenges blinded him to the fundamental flaw in putting inherently dangerous technology in routine use around children. He created detailed safety procedures, refined the mechanism designs, made improvements based on incident reports, but he never questioned whether springlock suits should exist at all, whether the capability they provided was worth the danger they posed. William Afton, for his part, appears to have understood the danger perfectly and simply not cared as long as the suits served his purposes, which increasingly involved using them for activities far darker than children's entertainment. The springlock era at Fredbear's Family Diner represents a period when the technology was still new, still being refined, still seen as the future of animatronic entertainment. Multiple suits existed, allowing for various combinations of automated and manual performance. Training procedures were still being developed based on early incidents that weren't yet serious enough to force complete decommissioning. The diner operated successfully for years, creating happy memories for thousands of families who had no idea they were watching employees risk their lives inside poorly secured mechanical death traps. This was the world that existed in the early 1980s, when the Afton family was still intact, when Fredbear's Family Diner was the primary location before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza expanded the brand, when springlock suits seemed like innovative technology rather than ticking time bombs. This was the foundation on which both bite incidents would eventually occur, the compromised ground that made tragedy not just possible, but practically inevitable. The technology that allowed employees to step inside animatronic suits would claim multiple victims over the years, but before the springlock failures that eventually forced the suits into permanent retirement, before William Afton would die inside one, during his final confrontation with the spirits of his victims, there was the bite of '83, a child's birthday party at Fredbear's Family Diner, a group of teenagers playing a cruel prank, an animatronic's jaws closing where they were never meant to close, and a tragedy that would haunt the Afton family and shape the franchise's future in ways no one at the time could have predicted. To understand what happened that day in 1983, we need to understand the victim, the circumstances, and the specific mechanics that turned a thoughtless prank into a fatal incident. We need to understand why those springlock jaws were so dangerous even when not being worn, why positioning someone's head in an animatronic's mouth was perhaps the worst possible place they could be, and how a moment of teenage cruelty resulted in a child's death. The bite of '83, a brother's terrible mistake. The crying child had always been afraid, not just nervous or shy, but genuinely, deeply terrified of the animatronics that entertained other children at Fredbear's Family Diner. while his peers laughed and clapped at the performances, while they rushed to hug the characters during meet and greets, this young boy saw only monsters. The mechanical movements, the fixed smiles, the empty eyes that didn't blink naturally, all of it filled him with dread that he couldn't articulate or overcome. His tears came easily and often, earning him the nickname we know him by in the FNAF community. The crying child, a boy whose fear of the very place his father helped create would ultimately prove prophetic. His older brother, widely accepted to be Michael Afton, found this fear entertaining. Not unusual for siblings, perhaps, but Michael took the teasing beyond typical brotherly antagonism into genuine cruelty. He owned a foxy mask, the grinning pirate's face that he would don before hiding in closets or jumping out from behind doors, reducing his younger brother to tears with calculated precision. The psychological torment was systematic, almost methodical. Lock the kid in his room and laugh while he pounds on the door, begging to be let out. Hide behind the television and leap out wearing the mask when the boy isn't expecting it. Corner him at the restaurant with friends wearing masks of the other animatronics, surrounding him with the very things that terrify him most. Michael didn't act alone. He had a small group of friends who joined in the harassment. Teenagers who wore masks of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica to complement Michael's foxy. Together, they formed a bullying unit, a pack mentality that enabled increasingly cruel pranks. At Fredbear's family diner, they would corner the crying child, chase him through the restaurant, make him cry in front of other guests. The public nature of the humiliation added another layer to the cruelty. Other children would see this kid breaking down in tears, marking him as weak, as different, as someone to avoid. The social isolation compounded the fear. Meanwhile, William Afton monitored his youngest son through an elaborate surveillance system involving Fredbear plushies placed strategically around their home and potentially in the diner itself. These weren't simple toys. They contained cameras and speakers, allowing William to watch and communicate with the crying child remotely. The plush would offer cryptic warnings and strange comfort, speaking in William's voice or perhaps something else, some early experiment in programming or possession. "Tomorrow is another day," the plush would say, or, "You know what will happen if he catches you." Whether William was trying to protect his son, study his fear, or simply maintain control over the situation remains ambiguous, but his surveillance certainly didn't prevent the tragedy to come. The week leading up to the crying child's birthday was particularly brutal. Michael and his friends escalated their harassment, perhaps sensing that the upcoming party would provide the perfect opportunity for their ultimate prank. 5 days before the party, Michael locks his brother in his room, leaving him crying on the floor while laughter echoes from outside. 4 days before, the foxy mask scare behind the TV. 3 days before, more corners and threats and tears in public places. The pattern builds, each day adding pressure, each incident teaching the crying child that he won't be safe even on his birthday, especially not at Fredbear's family diner, where the source of his nightmares performs nightly. The party itself was held at the diner, despite the crying child's obvious terror of the location. Why his family chose this venue when they knew his fear is a question that speaks to dysfunction beyond the typical Afton family disaster. Perhaps William insisted, wanting to force his son to overcome the phobia. Perhaps it was simply easier, already having the business connection. Perhaps nobody particularly cared what the birthday boy wanted. Whatever the reason, the crying child found himself at Fredbear's family diner, on what should have been a celebration, surrounded by the animatronics that haunted his dreams, trying to endure through sheer will. Michael and his friends saw their opportunity. The crying child was hiding under a table, trying to make himself small, trying to avoid the attention of the performers and the other guests. But Michael spotted him and rallied his masked crew. They approached, speaking in mock-friendly tones, pretending they just wanted to help him have fun. "Hey guys, I think the little man said he wants to give Fredbear a big kiss." The words were playful, but the intent was cruel. They grabbed the crying child, lifted him despite his struggles and protests, his tears already flowing, his small body rigid with fear, as they carried him toward the stage. Fredbear stood there in animatronic mode, not being worn by an employee, just the automated performer entertaining the crowd. His jaw could open and close as part of his movement routine, the springlock mechanism allowing for articulation even when not compressed for human use. Michael and his friends, laughing, raised the crying child to Fredbear's head height. The other guests probably thought it was just rough play, older kids being too boisterous with a younger sibling. Nobody intervened. Nobody told them to put him down. They thrust the crying child's head directly into Fredbear's mouth, holding him there, telling him to kiss the animatronic he feared so much. What happened next unfolded in horrible slow motion for those who were paying attention. Something caused Fredbear's jaw to close with catastrophic force. The prevailing theory points to the crying child's tears triggering the springlocks, moisture being one of the documented dangers for these mechanisms. Others suggest the jostling from his struggles could have loosened the locks, or perhaps it was simply mechanical failure at the worst possible moment. Whatever the precise cause, the springlocks released. Fredbear's jaw, designed to close with enough force to lock the suit for employee use, closed with full mechanical force on the child's skull. The sound must have been terrible. Metal meeting bone. The crunch and crack of a human skull unable to withstand pressure it was never meant to endure. The child's head was caught between upper and lower jaw components designed for animatronic function, not for accommodating living flesh. His frontal lobe, the entire front portion of his skull, crushed instantly. Blood immediately mixing with tears, spray painting Fredbear's golden fur a darkening red, spattering the stage and the teenagers who had been holding him. The laughing stopped. The party atmosphere shattered. The crying child went limp in their arms, his struggles ending, his body suddenly dead weight. Minigames in FNAF 4 show this moment frozen. Everyone in the scene paralyzed except for Spring Bonnie in the background, who continues his performance, unaware or uncaring. The crying child's body lies on the stage, his head still caught in Fredbear's mouth, the Showtime lights continuing to flash in horrible mockery of celebration. Paramedics were called. The diner erupted into chaos. Parents grabbed their own children and fled. Blood pooled on the stage while employees tried to figure out how to separate the animatronic's jaw from the child's crushed skull without doing further damage, though what further damage could matter at that point is unclear. The crying child was rushed to the hospital, but the injury was catastrophic. His frontal lobe was destroyed, the damage far beyond what 1980s medicine could repair. Brain trauma of that severity meant there was no recovery, only the question of how long it would take. The minigames show hospital scenes, beeping monitors, flowers and plushies arranged around the bed, where the crying child lies unresponsive. Michael visits, guilt already consuming him. leaning close to whisper apologies that his brother almost certainly cannot hear. "I'm sorry," he says, the words inadequate and too late, unable to undo what his cruelty caused. The Fredbear plush appears again in these hospital scenes, speaking its cryptic reassurances. "Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. I'm sorry. You're broken. I will put you back together." Whether this is William speaking through the surveillance system, trying to comfort his dying son, or something else, some early possession or programming, remains debated. But the promise of putting him back together would echo through the franchise, tied to theories about the crying child's ultimate fate and potential connections to Golden Freddy or other possessed animatronics. After what the minigames suggest was several days, potentially up to a week, based on the progression from birthday to flat line, the crying child died. The monitor's steady beep became a constant tone. The screen faded to black. A television in the background had been showing Fredbear and Friends, a cartoon based on the animatronics, and in the corner of that screen appeared the year 1983. This small detail, easily missed in early playthroughs, would become crucial evidence years later when the community tried to separate this incident from the bite of 87, mentioned in the first game. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Fredbear's family diner shut down. You can't operate a children's restaurant after a child dies horribly on stage in front of dozens of witnesses. The springlock suits came under immediate scrutiny, though they weren't banned yet. That would come later after further incidents. The Afton family fractured under the weight of guilt, grief, and the knowledge that William's business and Michael's cruelty had killed the youngest member of their family. Michael would carry that guilt for the rest of his life, possibly driving his later actions as he tried to atone or find his brother's spirit, or simply understand what he'd done. The bite of 83 wasn't classified as a bite at first. That terminology came later, retroactively, after the bite of 87 gave a framework for understanding what had happened. Initially, it was simply a tragedy, a horrible accident, a child dead from causes involving an animatronic malfunction. The company likely tried to frame it as equipment failure, rather than acknowledging the role of the teenager's cruelty or the fundamental unsafety of allowing powerful springlock jaws to operate around children. But however they tried to spin it, the result was clear. A child was dead, a family was destroyed, and a restaurant built on joy and entertainment had become the site of a nightmare that would haunt everyone involved. This was the first bite, though nobody called it that at the time. This was 1983, confirmed by that television screen, confirmed by later analysis of the timeline, confirmed by Scott Cawthon's careful placement of dates and details. 4 years before Phone Guy would mention the bite of 87 in that first game, before Mangle would swing down from the ceiling, before Jeremy Fitzgerald would take a day shift at a birthday party, there was this moment. A crying child, a cruel prank, a springlock jaw closing where it should never have been, and a death that changed everything for Fazbear Entertainment and the Afton family alike. Aftermath and consequences of 83. The silence after the crying child's death must have been deafening. Not just the literal silence of a shuttered restaurant, doors locked and lights off, stage empty of performers for the first time in years, but the deeper silence of everyone involved refusing to speak about what happened. Fazbear Entertainment, William Afton's company built on innovation and entertainment, had killed a child. Not in some hidden back room where the crime could be covered up, not in circumstances where blame could be deflected, but in front of witnesses, on stage, during a birthday party. The bite of 83 was public, traumatic, and absolutely impossible to spin into anything but what it was, a catastrophic failure that cost a young life. Fredbear's family diner closed immediately and permanently. You don't recover from that kind of incident. The parents who had been at that party told other parents. Word spread through the community. No amount of public relations could make people forget the image of a child's head being crushed in an animatronic's mouth. The diner that had been a beloved local establishment, the origin point of what would become a small empire of family entertainment, was now marked as the place where innocence ended. The building itself likely stood empty for a while, a monument to failure, before eventually being repurposed or demolished, its contents sent to storage or destroyed. The animatronics themselves, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, were retired from active service. Fredbear especially, the one whose jaws had done the actual killing, was too contaminated by association. You can clean blood off golden fur, but you can't erase what happened from people's memories. Both characters were moved into storage, held in reserve, their fate uncertain. The springlock technology that made them special also made them dangerous, and the bite of 83 was the first major public incident demonstrating just how catastrophic a springlock failure could be, even when the suit wasn't being worn. If the mechanism could close with enough force to crush a child's skull, what would it do to an employee trapped inside during a full springlock failure? Within the Afton family, the damage was irreparable. Michael Afton, guilty of killing his brother through a prank gone horribly wrong, withdrew into himself. The nightmares that FNAF 4 depicts, those twisted, monstrous versions of the animatronics, have been interpreted by many as Michael's guilt-induced terrors, his subconscious transforming the characters into the monsters his brother saw them as. Punishing himself nightly for what he'd done, he would spend years trying to atone, following his father's trail of destruction, putting himself in danger at various Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations, ultimately being scooped by animatronics in the underground facility, his own body becoming a vessel for escaped mechanical souls. Whether that represented seeking death as punishment or trying to understand what his brother might have become after death is open to interpretation. But the pattern suggests someone driven by unresolved guilt. William Afton's response to his youngest son's death remains somewhat unclear, muddied by the timeline and the fact that William was already on a dark path before the tragedy. Some theories suggest the crying child's death pushed William toward his experiments with remnant and possession, that losing his son made him obsessed with finding ways to restore life or preserve souls in mechanical forms. The phrase, "I will put you back together," spoken by the Fredbear plush, that served as William's surveillance tool, could be interpreted as a promise that William spent years trying to fulfill through his increasingly twisted experiments. His later murders, his stuffing of children's bodies into animatronics, his attempts to extract and inject remnant, all of it could be traced back to this moment of loss. But that theory gives William too much credit, implies his evil had sympathetic roots. Evidence suggests William was likely already killing by 1983, that his first victim may have been even before the crying child's death, and that his response to his son's tragedy was not grief-driven obsession, but simply more opportunity for his existing experiments. A father who truly cared would not have been monitoring his terrified child through surveillance plushies rather than protecting him. A father who loved his son wouldn't have let the birthday party happen at Fredbear's family diner when he knew the child's terror. William's relationship with his children was always transactional, experimental, and ultimately cruel. For Henry Emily, the bite of 83 represented the first crack in his belief that his creations were fundamentally safe. He had designed the springlock technology, had created the safety procedures, had believed that proper training and careful use could mitigate the dangers. Seeing those beliefs shattered by a child's death, especially a child of his business partner, forced confrontation with the reality that his innovations carried costs he hadn't fully considered. Henry's response was to double down on safety measures rather than abandon the technology entirely, to refine rather than rebuild, to add more warnings rather than admit the fundamental flaw. This half measure would continue to define Fazbear Entertainment's approach to safety, doing just enough to claim they tried without actually eliminating the dangers. The company itself adapted and evolved in response to the incident. They couldn't continue operating as Fredbear's Family Diner, not with that name now associated with child, death. But they could rebrand, expand, create new locations under a different identity that wasn't tainted by the tragedy. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which had already existed in some form, became the new primary brand. The focus shifted from Fredbear and Spring Bonnie to Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, a new cast of characters that could start fresh without the baggage of 1983. The original springlock suits stayed in storage, held as backups or used in limited capacity, but no longer as the stars of the show. New animatronics were designed, characters that weren't springlock suits, that were purely automated performers bolted safely to stages. The lessons learned from the bite of 83 should have included a complete abandonment of springlock technology, but Fazbear Entertainment took a more measured approach. They continued using the technology in some locations, continued training employees on springlock suit operation, but with enhanced warnings and stricter protocols. The spring suits were relegated to safe rooms, backup areas, used only when absolutely necessary, and never in the circumstances where they might be activated around guests. The expansion of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations after 1983 represented an attempt to move forward while carrying the weight of what happened. Every new restaurant opened in the shadow of that tragedy. Every parent who brought their children to Freddy's did so either not knowing about the incident at Fredbear's or choosing to trust that the new locations were different, safer, better regulated. The company encouraged this collective amnesia, never referencing the bite of 83 in their marketing, treating Fredbear's Family Diner as ancient history rather than recent trauma, rewriting the narrative to position Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as a fresh start rather than a continuation of a flawed enterprise. But the fundamental problems remained. The company still prioritized profit over safety. William Afton still had access to the locations and the technology. The animatronics still posed dangers that weren't fully disclosed to employees or guests. The safe rooms still existed as unmonitored spaces where terrible things could happen. The culture that allowed a child to die in 1983 didn't fundamentally change. It just became better at hiding its flaws and managing its public image. This continuity of dysfunction meant that tragedy would strike again, that more children would die in these restaurants, that the animatronics would claim more victims, and that eventually another bite would occur. The Fredbear and Friends television show, that cartoon that appeared in the background of the crying child's hospital room with 1983 clearly displayed, became a piece of crucial evidence years later when the community tried to separate the incidents. The show presumably continued airing after the bite of 83, becoming a strange cultural artifact where the character who killed a child remained a beloved children's entertainment icon. Or Perhaps the show was cancelled after the incident, the footage we see being the last broadcast, a final moment of innocence before everything changed. Either way, that copyright date of 1983 would eventually prove that the crying child's death happened 4 years before the incident Phone Guy mentioned, confirming 2 separate bytes rather than one misplaced in the timeline. The transition from 1983 to 1987 wasn't smooth or simple. It was a period of expansion and experimentation, of new locations opening and old ones closing, of technology improving while fundamental safety issues persisted. It was the era of the missing children incident, when William Afton would murder 5 children and stuff their bodies into the classic animatronics, creating the possessions that would haunt the franchise. It was when Circus Baby's Pizza World briefly opened and closed after Elizabeth Afton's death, adding another tragedy to William's family. It was when the underground facility was established, when springlock failures at a sister location would finally force the company to retire the technology entirely, when the toys were designed with facial recognition and advanced movement capabilities. And somewhere in all that change, in all that evolution and adaptation and attempted learning from past mistakes, the conditions were created for another bite to occur. Different circumstances, different victim, different animatronic, but the same fundamental pattern of negligence, unsafe practices, and prioritizing entertainment over protection. The bite of 83 should have been the wake-up call that forced real change. Instead, it became just another tragedy that Fazbear Entertainment absorbed, adapted to, and ultimately repeated. The years between, 1983 to 1987, the 4 years separating the 2 bite incidents, saw Fazbear Entertainment transform from a small operation centered on Fredbear's family diner into a multi-location chain with increasingly complex animatronic technology and increasingly dark secrets. This period between 1983 and 1987 represents perhaps the most crucial era for understanding how the company evolved, how safety took a back seat to innovation, and how William Afton's murders became intertwined with the business operations in ways that would haunt the franchise forever. Understanding this period requires tracing multiple storylines that converge toward the eventual bite of 87, each adding layers to a company already compromised by tragedy and criminal activity. Immediately following the bite of 83 and the closure of Fredbear's family diner, Fazbear Entertainment needed to demonstrate that they could operate safely, that the tragedy was an isolated incident rather than a systemic failure. The solution was expansion through franchising, creating multiple Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations that could operate with some independence while maintaining the brand identity. These new restaurants featured the characters that would become iconic in the franchise. Freddy Fazbear as the leading performer, Bonnie the rabbit guitarist, Chica the chicken with her cupcake companion, and Foxy the pirate tucked away in his pirate cove. These animatronics were designed as purely automated performers, not springlock suits, removing the most obvious danger from the earlier design. But the springlock technology wasn't completely abandoned. The original Fredbear and Spring Bonnie suits remained in storage at various locations, designated as backup performers or held in safe rooms for potential future use. Some locations apparently still use springlock suits for employee performances, continuing to train staff on the winding procedures and moisture warnings despite the 1983 tragedy. Training tapes from this era, preserved in audio recordings and later referenced in games, walk employees through springlock operation with clinical detachment, warning about the dangers while treating them as manageable risks, rather than reasons to abandon the technology entirely. If you are experiencing minor springlock malfunctions, one tape cheerfully explains, follow the designated safe room protocols. As if there could be such a thing as a minor springlock malfunction. Somewhere in this period, William Afton established Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, a separate venture focused on more advanced animatronic technology. The fun-time animatronics he created for this facility, including Circus Baby herself, represented a dark evolution in design. They weren't just entertainers. They were built to capture children, equipped with internal storage chambers and programmed behaviors designed to lure victims. Whether Afton created these with his daughter Elizabeth in mind as a victim, or whether her death inside Circus Baby was unintended, remains ambiguous, but the result was another child lost to animatronic technology, another Afton family tragedy, and another layer of possession and haunting added to the growing collection. The missing children incident occurred during this period, though its exact date within the 1983 to 1987 window remains debated. William Afton, wearing a spring bonnie suit as a disguise, lured 5 children away from the main party areas of a Freddy Fazbear's pizza location. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Cassidy, 5 names that would become intrinsically linked with the possessed animatronics they would inhabit. The murders themselves were calculated and cruel. Afton, using his knowledge of the building layout, the location of cameras, and the existence of safe rooms to commit crimes in spaces the security systems couldn't monitor. He stuffed the bodies into the animatronic suits, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the old Fredbear suit that had been stored there, now called Golden Freddy by staff who didn't know its origins. The puppet, possessed by Charlotte Emily after her earlier death outside a Freddy Fazbear's pizza location, intervened to give these murdered children a chance at existence beyond death. The Give Gifts, Give Life minigame shows this process, the puppet presenting the animatronic heads to the spirits of the dead children, allowing them to possess the machines and continue, trapped but aware, seeking revenge on their killer. This possession fundamentally changed how the animatronics behaved, adding supernatural aggression to their programmed movements, making them see adult staff as potential threats, or, in cases where facial features matched William Afton, as targets for vengeance. The company's response to the missing children incident was containment and deflection, rather than cooperation with authorities. Newspapers mention investigations, parents searching for their children, the FBI briefly getting involved, but without bodies, the case went cold. Fazbear Entertainment issued statements about safety being their top priority, while doing nothing substantive to address the actual dangers. The location where the murders occurred closed after reports of blood and mucus leaking from the animatronics, after complaints about odd smells and disturbing behavior. But the company attributed this to malfunction, rather than acknowledging what had actually happened. The possessed animatronics were moved to storage, destined to become the withered versions we encounter in later games. During this period, springlock failures at a sister location became severe enough that the company finally banned the technology from general use. Phone Guy's training tapes from this era mention multiple and simultaneous springlock failures, suggesting catastrophic incidents where multiple employees were injured or killed when suits failed during use. The exact nature of these failures, whether they happened at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, as some theories suggest, or at another location entirely, remains somewhat unclear. But the result was definitive. All springlock suits were ordered retired from active use. The safe rooms where they were stored were to be sealed, removed from building blueprints, hidden from both animatronics and employees to prevent any possibility of the suits being used again. This springlock retirement should have included complete decommissioning, should have involved destroying the suits, or at least removing the dangerous mechanisms. Instead, Fazbear Entertainment simply hid them, stuffing the Spring Bonnie and Fredbear suits into sealed safe rooms and pretending they didn't exist. This half measure would have consequences years later when William Afton would return to claim his Spring Bonnie suit and end up dying inside it, when investigations of old locations would stumble across sealed rooms containing rotting springlock suits that the building plans insisted weren't there, when the past refused to stay buried, no matter how thoroughly the company tried to cover it. By 1987, Fazbear Entertainment was ready to try again with a new location, a new approach, and new technology that they claimed would address previous failures. The company had learned something from the tragedies of 1983, from the murders of 1985, from the springlock failures that had killed multiple employees. They'd learned to be more careful about liability, to implement systems that could detect threats, to create animatronics that supposedly couldn't be used as tools for murder or malfunction into weapons. What they hadn't learned was humility, restraint, or the simple wisdom to shut down an enterprise built on compromised foundations. The new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location that opened in 1987 represented the company's most advanced attempt at safe, modern entertainment. The toy animatronics, redesigned versions of the classic characters, featured facial recognition technology linked to criminal databases, allowing them to identify registered predators and alert staff to potential dangers. They had increased mobility, allowing them to patrol the building and interact with guests in ways the older, stage-bound animatronics couldn't. They were friendlier looking, more appealing to children, designed to be approachable rather than intimidating. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, plus new additions like Mangle, originally Toy Foxy before children tore it apart daily, and Balloon Boy created a vibrant, energetic atmosphere that seemed to promise a fresh start. The old animatronics, the withered versions from the closed location where the missing children incident occurred, were moved to this new location for parts. Kept in storage, deemed too damaged and contaminated to ever perform again, they served as a salvage supply for maintaining the toys. But keeping possessed animatronics in your building, even in a back room, even when they're not active, creates problems. Their presence added to the location's supernatural undercurrent, their spirits aware and angry, waiting for opportunities to strike at adults who might be their killer, or might simply be unlucky enough to work the night shift. Phone Guy, who would eventually become infamous for his casual mention of the Bite of 87, worked at this location during its operational period. His calls to the night guard reveal someone who's seen enough of Fazbear Entertainment's dysfunction to be jaded, but not enough to actually quit. He warns about the toy's new behavior patterns, mentions that the animatronics seem to have some sort of criminal database attached to their recognition systems, notes that the old models are kept in back for parts. He's cheerful in that forced corporate way, reassuring guards that everything is fine, while describing situations that are objectively terrifying, trying to maintain morale for a job that routinely puts employees in mortal danger for minimum wage. The location operated through most of 1987, building a reputation, attracting families, hosting birthday parties. The facial recognition system supposedly made it safer. The new designs made it more appealing. The company's PR machine worked, over time to distance this location from past tragedies. For months, it seemed like Fazbear Entertainment had finally figured out how to run a restaurant without children disappearing or employees getting killed. The toys performed on stage and wandered during the day, interacting with guests, being friendly and approachable. Kids could visit Kids Cove to play with Mangle, taking apart and reassembling the animatronic in a sanctioned activity that must have horrified anyone who understood the implications. The prize corner featured the puppet in its music box, keeping it calm through constant winding, a strange security measure that nobody questioned. But underneath the friendly facade, problems festered. The toys were demonstrating aggressive behavior towards staff, advancing on them in ways that the facial recognition system didn't explain. The withered animatronics in back were active at night, despite being deactivated, roaming the building, their possessed nature overriding their damaged systems. Phone Guy's calls grew more concerned as the week progressed, mentioning increased aggressive tendencies, strange behaviors, malfunctions that couldn't be easily explained. Someone was wearing the old yellow suit, the Spring Bonnie costume from the sealed safe room, using it to do something that was not encouraged in the understatement of the decade. By November 1987, the location was clearly in trouble. An investigation was mentioned. The animatronics were becoming unmanageable. The company was planning to close after one final event, a birthday party, a day shift, an opportunity for everything that had been building since the bite of '83, since the missing children incident, since the springlock failures and the expansion and the supernatural hauntings, to converge into another moment of horror that would cement Fazbear Entertainment's reputation as a place where innocent people got hurt, and the company blamed everyone except themselves. The stage was set for the bite of '87. All that remained was for someone to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, for an animatronic to cross a line, for the company's promises of safety to be revealed once again as empty reassurances backed by nothing but hope and liability waivers. The bite of '87, a different horror night 6. At the 1987 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location should have been Jeremy Fitzgerald's last shift in the building. His week of overnight security had been harrowing, fending off aggressive toy animatronics who crawled through vents and advanced through dark hallways despite their facial recognition systems supposedly identifying him as safe. The withered animatronics from the back room joined in the nightly assault, their possessed forms driven by confused rage and the need to attack anyone who might be their killer. The puppet lurked in Prize Corner, requiring constant attention to its music box, or it would emerge to end your shift permanently. Phone Guy's calls each night grew increasingly desperate, his corporate cheerfulness cracking as he admitted the animatronics were malfunctioning, behaving aggressively towards staff, demonstrating problems that weren't supposed to be possible with their advanced programming. But Jeremy survived the week. His paycheck for those nights of hell would be dated November the 12th, 1987, a Friday. He'd made it through, earned his minimum wage payment for facing down possessed robots and malfunctioning toys, dealt with vent crawlers and hallway stalkers and the constant stress of watching camera feeds while managing limited power. Most employees quit after nights like that. But Jeremy, for reasons that might have been financial need or naive trust, or simply following orders, agreed to work one more shift, the day shift, during business hours. At a birthday party scheduled for what we can calculate would have been November 13th, 1987, falling on a Friday the 13th, by brutal coincidence. Phone Guy's instructions for this day shift carried an ominous undertone that's obvious in retrospect. but might not have been clear at the time. Hello. Hello, hello. Hello and welcome to your new summer job at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The cheerfulness was forced even by phone guy standards. He mentioned the day shift specifically, noting that someone was needed to fill in, that Jeremy would be working with the animatronics during operating hours. It's a birthday party, he explained, as if that was supposed to be reassuring. So you'll be on day shift. We need you to stay close to the animatronics and make sure they don't hurt anyone. That last part deserves emphasis. Stay close to the animatronics. Make sure they don't hurt anyone. This wasn't a casual suggestion. This was an explicit acknowledgement that the animatronics posed a danger significant enough to require human supervision during a children's birthday party. The company knew their entertainment robots were aggressive towards staff, knew they were malfunctioning, knew they demonstrated behaviors that the facial recognition system should have prevented. And their solution wasn't to fix the animatronics or cancel the party or shut down until the problems were resolved. Their solution was to put an employee in close proximity to dangerous machines and hope he could intervene if they decided to attack children. The birthday party itself would have followed the standard Freddy Fazbear's Pizza format. Families arriving, children running around excited by the arcade games and the animatronic performances, parents sitting at tables drinking sodas and supervising with varying levels of attention. The toy animatronics would have been in free roam mode, wandering the floor, interacting with guests, posing for photos. Toy Freddy leading songs from the stage. Toy Bonnie and Toy Chica mingling with the crowd. Mangle in Kids Cove being torn apart and reassembled by children. Balloon Boy making his rounds, his high-pitched giggles either delightful or annoying depending on your tolerance for animatronic toddlers. Jeremy, wearing his security uniform, would have positioned himself near the animatronics as instructed, watching for signs of the aggressive behavior that had plagued the night shifts. Maybe he was nervous, knowing what these machines were capable of when the lights were off and guests weren't around. Maybe he felt safer during business hours, assuming the animatronics' daytime programming would override whatever made them homicidal at night. Maybe he was just trying to do his job, following orders, earning his paycheck, not thinking too deeply about why the company needed armed guard babysitting their entertainment robots during a children's party. What happened next has never been shown directly in any FNAF game. We don't have a minigame depicting the moment, don't have security footage, don't have a detailed incident report. What we have is implication, aftermath, and Phone Guy's famous quote from the first game that established the Bite of 87 as a crucial piece of lore. They used to be allowed to walk around during the day too. But then there was the Bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know? Based on that quote and the timeline evidence, the community's prevailing theory suggests Jeremy Fitzgerald was the victim. One of the toy animatronics during the birthday party, with Jeremy standing close as instructed, appears to have bitten him. The attack targeted the frontal lobe specifically, the front portion of the brain located behind the forehead, responsible for personality, decision-making, motor function, and various cognitive processes. The bite was severe enough to remove or severely damage this frontal lobe, catastrophic brain trauma that should have been fatal, but somehow wasn't. The victim survived, though what that survival meant in terms of quality of life, cognitive function, and psychological trauma, we can only imagine. The immediate aftermath Must have been chaos similar to the bite of 83, but with more witnesses, more parents to panic, more children to traumatize. Blood at a birthday party, an animatronic with human tissue in its mouth. A security guard collapsed on the floor with his skull opened and his brain exposed. Screaming, crying, the party instantly dissolving into nightmare. Parents grabbing their children and fleeing. The animatronics presumably shutting down or being forcibly deactivated. Emergency services called. Jeremy rushed to the hospital. The restaurant cleared and locked down immediately. Phone guy mentions in that same first game call that the incident led directly to policy changes. The animatronics were no longer allowed to walk around during the day. Free roam mode, the feature that made the toy animatronics special, their ability to wander and interact and entertain beyond the stage, was permanently restricted to nighttime only. And even that was framed as being about preventing servo lockup rather than preventing attacks. The company couldn't admit that their robots had proven themselves dangerous enough to require confinement during business hours. So they claimed it was a technical necessity, something about the machinery needing to move periodically to stay functional. Nothing to do with the fact that one of them had just removed a man's frontal lobe at a children's birthday party. The 1987 location closed shortly after the incident. Newspaper clippings from FNAF 2 show articles about the toy animatronics being scrapped, the old models being withered and unusable, the location shutting down under investigation. The company didn't explicitly state that the bite of 87 caused the closure, couldn't admit that level of liability, but the timing tells the story. Final birthday party, terrible incident, immediate shutdown, toys destroyed rather than repaired or repurposed. The investigation mentioned in the articles probably focused on the animatronics' aggressive behavior, the facial recognition failures, the question of how supposedly safe advanced technology had mutilated an employee in front of children and parents. The widely accepted theory identifies Jeremy Fitzgerald as the bite victim, though this has never been explicitly confirmed in-game. Phone Guy's observation that the human body can live without the frontal lobe tells us the victim survived the initial trauma. Whether they recovered any quality of life, whether the damage left them in a vegetative state, whether they lived for years or died from complications shortly after, none of that has been confirmed. Some theories connect the victim to later characters or suggest alternative identities, but these remain speculative. What the evidence strongly suggests is that Jeremy, working day shift as instructed, was in the wrong place when an animatronics malfunction or possession-driven aggression led to the bite that changed company policy forever. The bite of 87 became infamous within the FNAF universe, a known incident that employees referenced, that shaped company policy, that served as a warning about what could happen when people got too comfortable around the animatronics. Unlike the bite of 83, which was covered up and buried, which became lost history that only those directly involved remembered, the bite of 87 was public knowledge. Phone Guy mentions it casually on night 1, assuming the guard would have heard about it, treating it as common knowledge within the Fazbear Entertainment employee community. The incident had consequences that rippled through the company's later operations, informing decisions about animatronic movement and supervision, and the constant balance between entertainment value and human safety. But here's the crucial question that has consumed the FNAF community for years. Which animatronic actually did it? Who was responsible for the bite of 87? Unlike the bite of 83, where Fredbear's involvement is clear, shown directly in the FNAF 4 minigames, the bite of 87's culprit has never been definitively identified. Phone Guy doesn't say which animatronic caused the bite. The newspaper articles don't specify. No minigame shows the moment. We're left with clues, implications, behavior patterns, and theories that have evolved over multiple games and years of community analysis. The list of suspects includes every animatronic that was present at the 1987 location and capable of walking around during the day. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, Mangle, even Balloon Boy despite his lack of teeth, have all been proposed at various points. The withered animatronics were kept in storage and supposedly not active during business hours, eliminating them from most suspect lists, though some theories suggest withered Foxy or another old model could have escaped containment. The puppet stayed in Prize Corner and doesn't have a mouth capable of biting, removing it from consideration. That leaves primarily the toy line as realistic culprits, animatronics who are in free roam mode, who are demonstrating aggressive behavior, who are close to guests and staff during the party. The mystery of the bite of 87's culprit deserves its own detailed examination, looking at each suspect's evidence, the community's theories, and why this question has remained unanswered despite years of analysis and multiple games providing additional context. The suspects, who was responsible? The identity of the animatronic responsible for the bite of 87 has become one of FNAF's most enduring mysteries, debated across forums, analysed in countless theory videos, dissected by everyone from casual players to dedicated lore researchers. Unlike the bite of 83, where we see Fredbear's jaws close on the crying child's head, the bite of 87 happened off-screen, described but never shown, leaving us to construct the culprit's identity from implications, behavior patterns, and subtle hints scattered across multiple games. Each suspect has their advocates, each theory its supporting evidence, and Scott Cawthon has remained deliberately silent on confirmation, allowing the mystery to persist as one of the franchise's defining questions. The most popular theory, the one that's achieved something close to community consensus, though not universal acceptance, points to Mangle as the culprit. The evidence supporting Mangle's guilt starts with behavior patterns. In FNAF 2, Mangle's jump scare involves swinging down from the ceiling and lunging at the player's head with jaws wide open, specifically targeting the top of the skull where the frontal lobe is located. This attack pattern matches what we know about the bite of 87, frontal lobe damage from an animatronic bite. If Mangle attacks this way in the game, the reasoning goes, this could have been how the day shift victim was attacked. Mangle's physical capabilities support this theory. The animatronic is the only one we know crawled on ceilings, giving it access to head height, even when victims were standing. During the birthday party, if Mangle was in its usual position in Kids Cove, or wandering near ceiling fixtures, it could have dropped down onto the victim without warning, jaws closing on their head before they could react. The element of surprise combined with Mangle's documented aggression creates a plausible scenario. If we accept that the day shift employee was told to stay close to the animatronics, they would have been monitoring the toys when Mangle, triggered by whatever was causing the nighttime aggression, dropped from above and bit. Mangle's backstory adds another layer to the theory. Originally designed as Toy Foxy, the animatronic was placed in Kids Cove, where children could take it apart and put it back together as an interactive attraction. Daily dismemberment, reassembly by small hands that didn't understand proper construction, constant damage and repair by staff who eventually gave up maintaining it properly, All of that abuse could have damaged Mangle's programming or physical structure in ways that made it unstable. Phone Guy mentions that the staff just started calling it the Mangle after giving up on fixing it, treating the destroyed state as the character's intended form. An animatronic subjected to that kind of treatment might have developed glitches that made its behavior unpredictable and dangerous. The community has also noted Mangle's ambiguous gender, the way Phone Guy refers to it as male while other sources suggest female, creating confusion about the character's identity. Some theories link this to possession, suggesting Mangle might be inhabited by the spirit of a dog based on vague connections to other FNAF lore, and that a dog-possessed animatronic might be more likely to bite randomly. This feels like reaching, adding unnecessary complexity to what could be simpler mechanical malfunction, but it demonstrates how thoroughly fans have analyzed every aspect of potential suspects. However, Toy Chica presents equally compelling evidence as an alternative culprit. In Ultimate Custom Night, years after FNAF 2, Toy Chica has a voice line that many interpret as a confession. "Where's my beak?" Lodged in your forehead, of course. This seems like a direct reference to the Bite of 87, suggesting that Toy Chica's beak, her pointed facial feature, became lodged in someone's forehead during an attack on the frontal lobe. If this line is meant to be taken as canon evidence, rather than just a darkly humorous reference, it would make Toy Chica the culprit. The beak would have acted like a spike, driving into Jeremy's skull before the rest of the jaw closed on his head. Toy Chica's behavior in FNAF 2 shows aggression equal to the other toys. She advances through the building at night, her movements tracked by security cameras. Her attacks ended only by the light or the Freddy mask trick. During the day, she would have been in free roam mode like the others, wandering among guests, interacting with children. If her programming glitched or her possession influenced aggression triggered during the party, she could have targeted the victim, jaws snapping shut on their head, beak puncturing skull, frontal lobe damaged in the assault. The UCN line makes this theory harder to dismiss than it might otherwise be. Some theories suggest both animatronics were involved. A bite both theory, where Toy Chica initiated the attack and Mangle finished it, or vice versa. This seems unnecessarily complex, multiplying entities beyond necessity, but it does attempt to reconcile the evidence for both suspects. Perhaps Toy Chica's beak pierced Jeremy's forehead, then Mangle descended to actually tear out the frontal lobe, both guilty in different ways. Or perhaps the incident involved multiple animatronics glitching simultaneously, a cascade failure where several toys attacked at once, and we're trying to assign singular blame to what was actually a group assault. Toy Freddy and Toy Bonnie are less commonly proposed as culprits, but can't be entirely eliminated. They were present, they were in free roam mode, they demonstrated aggressive behavior. Toy Freddy's jump scare approaches from the front, jaws wide, capable of the kind of bite we're talking about. Toy Bonnie moves quickly and aggressively through the building at night, showing no special affection for humans that would prevent an attack. The main reason these two aren't more popular suspects is lack of specific evidence pointing to them. No voice lines suggesting guilt, no attack patterns that specifically target the head, nothing that makes them stand out from the general pool of toys who theoretically could have done it. The withered animatronics, despite being kept in storage, have been proposed in some theories. Withered Foxy's damaged jaw, his out-of-order status in FNAF 1, the blood visible on Withered Chica's endoskeleton in VR minigames. All of this has been pointed to as potential evidence. The theory usually requires that one of the withered animatronics escaped the parts and service room, made it to the party area, attacked Jeremy, and then was blamed for the incident, even though it was the toys who were in free roam mode. This seems like a stretch, requiring more assumptions than the simpler toy theories, but it attempts to explain why all the toys were scrapped after the incident, rather than just the guilty party being decommissioned. Some fans have even proposed Balloon Boy, despite his complete lack of biting capability, suggesting he somehow contributed to or triggered the incident, even if he didn't physically do the biting. These theories treat Balloon Boy as an accomplice, perhaps disabling Jeremy's defenses somehow, allowing another animatronic to attack. This feels desperate, trying to give Balloon Boy significance he hasn't earned, but it shows how thoroughly the community has examined every possible suspect. The truth is, we may never have definitive confirmation of the culprit's identity. Scott Cawthon might consider the ambiguity part of the mystery's appeal, might prefer leaving some questions unanswered to fuel continued discussion and theory crafting. Or he might have intended a specific animatronic to be understood as guilty based on clues we're meant to piece together, and the community simply hasn't reached consensus on interpreting those clues correctly. The Toy Chica UCN line seems like the strongest direct evidence we have, but it came years after FNAF 2 and could be interpreted as Scott throwing fuel on the debate fire rather than settling it. What we can say with certainty is that one of the toy animatronics, in free roam mode during a birthday party at the 1987 location, bit Jeremy Fitzgerald hard enough to remove or severely damage his frontal lobe. The attack was severe enough to cause permanent policy changes, ending daytime free roam and accelerating the location's closure. The guilty animatronic was presumably scrapped along with the other toys, destroyed rather than repaired, eliminating the evidence of what exactly malfunctioned or glitched or possessed spirit influence to cause the attack. And unlike the Bite of 83, which we witnessed directly in FNAF 4's minigames, the Bite of 87 remains obscured, described but not shown, leaving its exact details to our reconstruction and the culprit's identity to endless debate. This ambiguity serves the story well in some ways. It maintains the mystery, keeps community discussion alive, prevents the incident from becoming too concrete, and therefore less frightening. The moment we know exactly which animatronic did it, and exactly how it happened, some of the horror diminishes. The unknown, the gap where our imagination fills in details, often generates more fear than explicit description. So maybe the Bite of 87 works better as suggestion than revelation, its power coming from what we don't see rather than what we do. But for those seeking complete understanding of FNAF's timeline, for those who want to know exactly what happened in that restaurant on November 13th, 1987, the lack of definitive answer remains frustrating. We can compare the two bites, we can note their similarities and differences, we can trace their impacts on the franchise's lore, but we can't point to the Bite of 87's minigame equivalent and say definitively that animatronic, that victim, that moment. Instead, we piece together implications, follow evidence trails that seem to lead somewhere but never quite arrive at confirmation, and accept that some mysteries may persist even as the franchise continues adding new layers to its already complex narrative. Comparing the two incidents, now that we've examined both bites individually, we can lay them side by side and explore what the comparison reveals about Fazbear Entertainment, about animatronic dangers, about how history repeats in this franchise until someone finally breaks the cycle. The Bite of 83 and the Bite of 87 are mirror images in many ways, reflections of the same fundamental problems playing out under different circumstances, separated by 4 years, but connected by the same corporate negligence and technological hubris that made both incidents possible. Understanding their similarities helps us see the patterns, while recognizing their differences reveals how the company learned nothing from the first tragedy that might have prevented the second. Both incidents involved animatronic jaws closing on human heads, specifically targeting the frontal lobe region. In 1983, Fredbear's springlock jaw crushed the crying child's skull. The force meant for locking the suit instead applied to living bone and brain tissue. In 1987, a toy animatronic bit Jeremy Fitzgerald's forehead with enough force to remove or severely damage his frontal lobe. Teeth designed for appearance and minor articulation instead became weapons capable of catastrophic trauma. The parallels in injury location aren't coincidental. The frontal lobe sits behind the forehead, making it vulnerable to attacks from animatronics whose jaws naturally target head height. Both incidents demonstrated that animatronic bite force, whether from springlock mechanisms or standard jaw articulation, far exceeded what was safe for human contact. Both tragedies occurred during celebratory events. The crying child was at his own birthday party, the worst day of his life coinciding with what should have been celebration. Jeremy Fitzgerald was supervising a birthday party for other people's children, turning a shift that should have been routine, maybe even pleasant compared to the nightmare of night security, into the moment he lost part of his brain. Birthday parties, these quintessential childhood celebrations, became the backdrop for horror in both cases. The juxtaposition of joy and trauma, of decorations and blood, of children's laughter turning to screams, amplified the horror of both incidents. Fazbear Entertainment specialized in corrupting innocence, turning places that should be safe into danger zones. Both bites happened at Fazbear Entertainment locations, though different types reflecting the company's evolution. The 83 bite occurred at Fredbear's Family Diner, the original establishment, small and focused, the place where it all began. The 87 bite happened at one of the expanded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations, part of the chain that grew from Fredbear's closure, representing the company's attempt to move beyond its origins while carrying all the same problems forward. The location change meant different animatronics, different technology, different scale of operation, but the same fundamental negligence, the same prioritization of profit and entertainment over human safety. Both incidents resulted in immediate closures of their respective locations. Fredbear's Family Diner shut down permanently after the 83 bite, never to reopen. The diner that started Fazbear Entertainment, becoming a memory and a warning. The 1987 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location closed shortly after Jeremy's attack. Investigations launched. Toy animatronics scrapped. Another restaurant added to the growing list of Fazbear properties that couldn't stay open because people kept dying or getting mutilated. The pattern of operation, incident, closure, denial, reopen elsewhere under slightly different branding was well established by this point. The company never actually fixed the fundamental problems, just moved to new locations and hoped the next one would somehow be different. Both bites led to policy changes, though different in scope. After 83, springlock suits came under scrutiny, eventually leading to their retirement from active service, though not immediate destruction. The technology that made Fredbear and Spring Bonnie special became their death sentence as devices, not trusted anymore for human interaction. After 87, animatronic free roam mode during business hours was eliminated. ending the toy animatronics' main selling point, their ability to walk around and interact with guests during parties and regular operations. The company's response to each tragedy was restriction rather than genuine safety improvement, taking away features rather than addressing root causes. But here's where the incidents diverge in crucial ways. The victim profiles were completely different. The crying child in 1983 was approximately 8 years old based on his appearance and behavior. A child attending his own birthday party. Someone who should have been protected by every adult present. Jeremy Fitzgerald in 1987 was an employee, an adult working a job, someone who theoretically understood was in a dangerous environment based on his week of night shifts. The age difference matters for liability, for public perception, for how the incidents were reported and remembered. A child dying at his own party generates different outrage than an adult employee being injured on the job, even though both are tragic and both reveal the same corporate failures. The outcomes differed drastically. The crying child died within days of the bite, his injuries too severe for 1983 medical technology to address. His death was certain from the moment Fredbear's jaws closed, the only question being how long he would linger in the hospital before the machines flatlined. Jeremy Fitzgerald survived, though with life-altering brain damage. Phone Guy's observation that the human body can live without the frontal lobe suggests Jeremy continued existing, though what that existence looked like, whether he had any quality of life or cognitive function, remains unspecified. Survival versus death marks perhaps the most significant difference between the incidents, changing how they're categorized and remembered. The intentionality behind each bite also differs. The 83 bite resulted from deliberate cruelty that backfired catastrophically. Michael Afton and his friends meant to scare the crying child, to push the prank as far as possible, to make him cry and humiliate him in front of party guests. They didn't intend to kill him. They didn't understand that forcing his head into an active animatronic's mouth could trigger springlock mechanisms or simply result in crushing force. Their ignorance doesn't excuse the cruelty, but it establishes this as manslaughter rather than murder, a prank gone wrong rather than intended violence. The 87 bite appears to have been unprovoked animatronic malfunction or glitch, not human cruelty. Jeremy wasn't attacked by other people using an animatronic as a weapon. An animatronic attacked him directly, motivated by possession or programming error or some combination thereof, that made it see him as a threat or target. The technology involved represents different eras of animatronic development. Fredbear was a springlock suit, first-generation technology, innovative but fundamentally flawed. His jaws were designed to lock with tremendous force to secure the suit for employee wear, meaning they carried lethal potential when closing on something that wasn't meant to be crushed. The mechanism that made springlock suits special, the ability to compress and release, made them dangerous in ways simpler animatronics weren't. The toy animatronics of 1987 were supposedly more advanced, featuring facial recognition, enhanced mobility, modern safety features that should have prevented attacks. Yet one of them still bit Jeremy hard enough to remove his frontal lobe, proving that technological advancement didn't eliminate danger, just repackaged it in prettier shells with more sophisticated programming. The public nature of the incidents also differed. The 83 bite happened on stage, in the main performance area, during a party with many witnesses including children and parents who saw everything. The horror was immediate and visible, impossible to downplay or spin. The 87 bite presumably happened during a party as well, but we don't know the exact circumstances, where Jeremy was standing, how many people witnessed the attack, whether it happened quickly or played out over agonizing moments. The newspaper articles suggest the incident was known and investigated, but the specific details aren't documented the way FNAF 4's minigames document the earlier tragedy. The company's response timelines reveal another difference. After the 83 bite, Fredbear's closed immediately and permanently, but the company continued operating, expanding into Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, using the tragedy as a reset point to rebrand and grow. After the 87 bite, the specific location closed, but we don't have evidence of company-wide impact. Other Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations may have continued operating. The 1987 incident treated as a local problem rather than a systemic failure. The company had learned by then how to compartmentalize incidents, to contain damage to individual restaurants, to avoid letting one tragedy sink the entire enterprise. Both incidents contributed to the possessed animatronic problem, though in different ways. The crying child potentially became a spirit inhabiting Golden Freddy, or influencing other animatronics, his death adding to the collection of trapped souls seeking revenge. Jeremy survived, but his blood and trauma at the location where the missing children's spirits were already active, where the withered animatronics possessed by murder victims were stored in back, added to the supernatural resonance. These restaurants accumulated trauma, layered death and suffering, creating environments where the line between mechanical and spiritual, between programming and possession, became increasingly blurred. The lessons that should have been learned from comparing these incidents are obvious. Animatronics with powerful jaws shouldn't operate around humans, especially around children. Technology that can crush skulls shouldn't be trusted in entertainment venues. Free roam modes that allow direct contact between machines and guests create unacceptable risk. Company policies that prioritize cost savings over safety inevitably lead to tragedy. Multiple incidents following the same pattern reveal systemic failure rather than random accidents. But Fazbear Entertainment never truly learned these lessons. They adapted, restricted, added warnings and policies, but they never addressed the fundamental problems. They never asked whether children's entertainment venues should feature animatronics at all, whether the entire concept was too dangerous to continue, whether their business model was built on accepting that sometimes people would die for the sake of profit. The gap between what the bites taught and what the company learned explains why tragedy continued throughout the franchise, why restaurants kept closing after new incidents, why the cycle of disaster never broke until Henry Emily finally burned everything down in Pizzeria Simulator. Understanding both bites, seeing their parallels and differences, reveals the full scope of Fazbear Entertainment's failure. One tragedy might be an accident. Two following similar patterns is negligence. The fact that the 87 bite happened 4 years after the 83 bite, after springlock failures, after the missing children incident, after countless opportunities to recognize and address fundamental safety issues, makes it inexcusable. Jeremy Fitzgerald didn't have to lose his frontal lobe. The crying child didn't have to die. These weren't inevitable accidents. They were predictable results of a company that repeatedly chose profit over people and hoped this time would be different without actually changing anything meaningful. The community confusion. For years, the Five Nights at Freddy's community believed there was only one bite. When Phone Guy mentioned the bite of 87 in that first game, that casual observation about surviving without a frontal lobe it became one of the franchise's defining mysteries. Which animatronic did it? Who was the victim? What exactly happened? Theories proliferated about Foxy being responsible, about the victim being a child who visited the pizzeria, about the incident happening during FNAF 1's timeline despite Phone Guy speaking about it in past tense. The bite of 87 was the bite, the infamous incident that everyone referenced, the tragedy that changed company policy and stuck in everyone's memory. Then FNAF 4 released, and everything became more complicated. The game's minigames showed a bite incident, a child's head being crushed in Fredbear's jaws, a tragedy at what appeared to be a birthday party at Fredbear's family diner. The community immediately assumed this was the bite of 87 finally revealed, the incident Phone Guy had referenced now shown in graphic detail. It made sense. Scott Cawthon had been building toward revealing this mystery since the first game. FNAF 4 was positioned as a conclusion of sorts, the final chapter that would answer lingering questions. Of course it would show the bite of 87. What else could a bite incident in a FNAF game possibly be? Markiplier's reaction to witnessing the FNAF 4 bite encapsulated the community's excitement and assumption perfectly. "Was that the bite of 87? He exclaimed, his voice rising with shock and realization, the famous line delivered with genuine emotion before descending into nervous laughter as he processed what he'd just witnessed. The moment became iconic instantly, spreading across social media, becoming a meme, capturing not just Markiplier's reaction, but the entire community's sense of finally having an answer to one of the franchise's biggest questions. For a brief moment, it seemed like the mystery was solved, but then fans started noticing details that didn't quite fit. The FNAF 4 minigames featured a television screen showing Fredbear and Friends, a cartoon program that, in the bottom corner, displayed a copyright date of 1983. The detail was easy to miss on the first playthrough, a small number on a background television that most players weren't paying close attention to while processing the emotional weight of the crying child story. But once noticed, once the date was confirmed and verified across multiple playthroughs, and by multiple community members examining screenshots and footage, the implications were undeniable. If the FNAF 4 minigames took place in 1983, the bite shown couldn't be the bite of 87. The community's reaction to this revelation was a mixture of confusion, frustration, and renewed theorizing. Some players initially denied the evidence, insisting that the 1983 date must mean something else, that it was the year the TV show premiered, but not necessarily the year the events took place. But that logic didn't hold up under scrutiny. Television programs showing in minigame backgrounds have consistently indicated the time period of the scenes. The year displayed wouldn't be random. Scott Cawthon didn't include details like that accidentally. If the screen said 1983, the minigames happened in 1983. Other fans immediately embraced the timeline split, recognizing it as another layer of Scott's deliberate misdirection. He'd built the franchise on misleading players, on hiding crucial information in obscure details, on making assumptions that would later be challenged by new evidence. Of course there were two bites. Of course FNAF 4 showed a different incident than Phone Guy mentioned. Of course the community had been wrong in assuming there was only one bite to explain. This fit perfectly with Scott's approach to storytelling, where nothing was straightforward and every assumption needed to be questioned. The realization that there were two separate bite incidents, the bite of 83 and the bite of 87, fundamentally changed how the community approached the timeline. Suddenly, everyone had to reevaluate their theories, If FNAF 4 showed 1983, then what happened in 1987? If the crying child was the 83 victim, who was the 87 victim? If Fredbear did one bite, who did the other? The game that was supposed to answer questions had instead revealed that we'd been asking the wrong ones, that the mystery was bigger than we'd understood, that two tragedies needed explaining instead of one. MatPat and game theory played a significant role in helping the community process this revelation. His theory videos walked through the evidence, examined the dates, compared the incidents, and helped crystallize the 2-byte framework that became standard understanding. While not all his theories were correct, some were later proven wrong by subsequent games. His work in establishing the separate timeline of the bytes helped the community reach consensus. The videos became reference points, places where confused fans could go to understand what evidence existed and how it fit together into a coherent narrative of two separate tragedies. Was that the bite of 87? Line evolved from Markiplier's genuine shocked reaction into a meme that captured the community's relationship with FNAF's mysteries. It represented the excitement of thinking you've solved something major, the confidence in your interpretation, followed by the realization that you'd been wrong, that the answer was more complex, that Scott had misdirected you perfectly. The phrase became shorthand for jumping to conclusions, for assuming you understood something before having all the evidence, for the experience of being a FNAF theorist, where every answer generates 3 new questions. The meme spread beyond the FNAF community, becoming a general reaction to jarring or disturbing imagery, to moments of shock or realization in other contexts. People who'd never played Five Nights at Freddy's knew there was that the bite of 87 line, understood it as expressing surprise and confusion, used it in situations completely unrelated to the original context. This mimetic spread actually brought more people into the FNAF community, drew new players curious about the reference, expanded the franchise's reach through viral culture in ways traditional marketing never could. The confusion around the 2 bytes also revealed how deliberately Scott Cawthon constructed his timeline to reward careful attention. The 1983 date wasn't loudly announced. It wasn't in dialogue or explicitly stated in a way impossible to miss. It was a detail on a background television screen, something you had to notice and recognize as significant. Players who rushed through the minigames without examining every element would miss it entirely. This approach to storytelling demanded engagement, rewarded players who paid attention to seemingly minor details, created communities where people shared discoveries and compared notes to piece together the full picture. The timeline debates that followed the 2-byte revelation extended into questions about FNAF 2's position in the chronology. If FNAF 4 showed 1983, and FNAF 2 took place in 1987, as the paychecks indicated, then FNAF 2 was a prequel to FNAF 1, despite being the second game released. This realization that the games weren't told in chronological order, that Scott was deliberately shuffling the timeline, made everything more complicated, but also more interesting. Every game had to be examined for dates, for clues about when it took place relative to other entries, for evidence of where it fit in the overall narrative. The community gradually accepted the 2-byte framework, incorporating it into timelines and theories, using it to explain character motivations and plot developments. The bite of 83 became understood as the Afton family tragedy, the incident that killed William's youngest son and scarred Michael forever, the closure of Fredbear's family diner, and the beginning of Fazbear Entertainment's expansion. The bite of 87 remained somewhat mysterious in its specifics, but was clearly a separate incident at a different location with a different victim. The event that ended animatronic free roam during business hours and contributed to the 1987 location's closure. This acceptance wasn't universal or immediate. Some fans clung to theories that tried to reconcile FNAF 4's bite with Phone Guy's mention, suggesting that maybe the dates were wrong or the incidents were related in ways we hadn't understood. But the majority of the community recognized that 2 bites made sense within the franchise's pattern of repeated tragedies, of Fazbear Entertainment making the same mistakes over and over, of animatronics hurting people across multiple locations and eras. The confusion gave way to understanding, and the 2 incidents took their place as separate but connected events in the franchise's dark history. The lesson from this confusion, beyond the specific lore details, was about how FNAF storytelling works. Scott Cawthon doesn't provide clear answers. He provides evidence that requires interpretation, clues that can be assembled in different ways, details that challenge assumptions. The community's initial belief in a single bite wasn't wrong, based on the information available through FNAF 3. It was incomplete, missing the larger picture that FNAF 4 revealed. This pattern of incomplete information followed by revelation defined the franchise's approach to narrative, kept communities engaged across multiple games, and created an environment where theories evolved as new evidence emerged. The 2 bites, once separated and understood as distinct incidents, became cornerstones of FNAF timeline construction. Understanding that 1983 and 1987 marked separate tragedies helped organize other events around them, place the missing children incident in the gap between, recognize the springlock failures as coming after the first bite but before the second, see how the company evolved in response to each tragedy without actually fixing anything fundamental. The confusion that initially surrounded these incidents, the memes and debates and conflicting theories, became part of the franchise's cultural legacy, a chapter in how the community learned to interpret Scott's deliberately cryptic storytelling, evidence and timeline analysis. Establishing the facts about both bite incidents requires examining concrete evidence from across the franchise, separating what we can confirm from what remains speculative, and understanding how various clues fit together to create a coherent timeline. The beauty and frustration of FNAF lore is that definitive answers often come from small details easily missed, from dates barely visible on background props, from implications in dialogue rather than explicit statements. Let's walk through what evidence actually exists for each bite and how we know what we know, building the case for 2 separate incidents from the ground up. The most crucial piece of evidence establishing the bite of 83 is the television screen in FNAF 4's minigames. During the sequence where the crying child is at home, a TV in his living room displays Fredbear and Friends, a cartoon show featuring the restaurant's characters. In the bottom corner of that screen appears 1983 in small but legible numbers. This isn't ambiguous. It's not subject to interpretation. It's a date, clearly displayed, confirming when these minigames take place. The same minigames show the birthday party, the bullying, and the eventual bite, meaning all those events happened in 1983, not 1987. This single detail separated the 2 incidents in community understanding, transforming what seemed like the reveal of Phone Guy's mentioned bite into the discovery that there were 2 bites to explain. Additional evidence supporting 1983 comes from Help Wanted's private room Easter egg. Players who input 1983 into a specific number pad unlock a plush of the puppet, directly connecting that year to significant lore elements. While this doesn't directly reference the bite, It reinforces that 1983 was a crucial year in the franchise's timeline, a year when important tragedies occurred, lending credibility to the interpretation that the FNAF 4 events, including the bite, took place then. The consistency across games, with FNAF 4 showing the date and Help Wanted confirming its significance, removes doubt about when the crying child died. For the bite of 87, our primary evidence comes from Phone Guy's mention in the first game, and the timeline established in FNAF 2. Phone Guy's Night 1 call establishes the bite as a past event. They used to be allowed to walk around during the day too. But then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know? This tells us several things. The bite happened in 1987. It involved an animatronic biting someone's head, specifically damaging the frontal lobe. The victim survived, at least initially. The incident led to policy changes, ending daytime free roam for animatronics. Phone Guy knows about it and assumes other employees do too, suggesting it was well publicized within the company. FNAF 2 provides the date confirmation through Jeremy Fitzgerald's paycheck, visible on the screen after Night 6, dated November 12, 1987, combined with Phone Guy's mention that Jeremy will be working the day shift at a birthday party after that final night shift. We can place the bite of 87 to November 13, 1987, which fell on a Friday the 13th that year by cruel coincidence. The timing is tight, the pieces fit together cleanly, and while the actual bite isn't shown like the 83 incident was, the evidence chain strongly suggests Jeremy was the victim, and the day shift party was when it happened. The newspaper articles at the end of FNAF 2 mention the restaurant closing and the toy animatronics being scrapped, but don't explicitly mention a bite. This might seem like missing evidence, but it actually fits with how Fazbear Entertainment handles incidents. They minimize, deflect, attribute problems to possible malfunctions, rather than admitting catastrophic failures. A newspaper mentioning malfunctions leading to closure, combined with Phone Guy's later reference to the bite that changed policy, paints a picture where the incident happened, was investigated, led to the location shutting down, but wasn't fully detailed in public statements. The company controlled the narrative enough to avoid stating that an animatronic ate someone's frontal lobe at a children's birthday party. Timeline placement requires understanding that FNAF 2 is a prequel to FNAF 1, despite being the second game released. Jeremy's paycheck is dated November 1987, while Mike Schmidt's paycheck in FNAF 1 is dated November 1993, 6 years later. This means everything in FNAF 2, the toy animatronics, the reopened and soon-to-be closed location, Jeremy's night shifts and final day shift, happened before the events of the first game, where Phone Guy mentions the bite of 87 as a known incident from years past. The prequel structure explains why Phone Guy discusses the bite as established history, why the policy about daytime animatronic movement is already in place by FNAF 1, why the characters and locations are different between games. The springlock failures mentioned in FNAF 3's training tapes provide context for the technology involved in the bite of 83. Phone Guy describes multiple and simultaneous springlock failures at a sister location that led to all springlock suits being retired from service. These failures presumably happened after 1983, since Fredbear was still operating in springlock mode at the birthday party, but before the murders William Afton committed using the Spring Bonnie suit, since those murders happened at a closed location where the suits were stored but still accessible. The exact date of the springlock ban isn't specified, but it slots into the timeline between the two bites, part of the company's evolution and response to various tragedies. The separation of the incidents is also supported by their different characteristics. Phone Guy specifically says the bite of 87 victim lived, that the human body can survive without a frontal lobe. The FNAF 4 crying child explicitly dies, shown in the final minigame with the flatline sound and fading screen. These outcomes can't both be describing the same incident. Either the victim died or survived, and Phone Guy's statement combined with the minigame's ending means these must be different people, different incidents, even if both involved animatronic bites to the head. The location differences further separate the bites. FNAF 4 shows a location that appears to be Fredbear's family diner, based on the characters present, and the FNAF World Stage Era 1 minigame that depicts Fredbear and Spring Bonnie at what's labelled as the original diner. FNAF 2 takes place at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location with toy animatronics, completely different characters and setting. Fredbear's was the original establishment, closed after 1983. The 1987 location was part of the later expansion, a different venue in the chain. Geography and company structure support these being separate incidents at separate restaurants. Some evidence remains ambiguous or subject to interpretation. We can't definitively state which toy animatronic bit Jeremy, though Mangle and Toy Chica have the strongest circumstantial cases. We don't know the crying child's name, though various theories propose names like Chris or Evan, based on thin evidence from later games. We don't have complete certainty about whether the crying child became Golden Freddy or remains a spirit attached to other entities. These gaps don't undermine the core timeline of two separate bites, but they keep certain details uncertain, leaving room for continued theorizing. The evidence trail requires examining multiple games to piece together the full picture. FNAF 1 mentions the 87 bite without showing it. FNAF 2 establishes the 1987 date and likely victim through Jeremy's circumstances. FNAF 3 provides springlock context. FNAF 4 shows the 83 bite with the television date. Later games like Help Wanted provide additional confirmation through Easter eggs and references. This scattered approach to information, requiring players to connect details across years of releases, defines how FNAF lore works. You can't understand everything from one game. You need the full context, the accumulated evidence, the community's collective analysis to construct the complete timeline. What we can state with confidence based on available evidence. The bite of 83 happened at Fredbear's family diner in 1983. Involved Fredbear's springlock jaw closing on the crying child's head after Michael Afton and his friends placed him there. Resulted in the child's death after several days in the hospital and led to the diner's closure. The bite of 87 happened at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location in November 1987. Likely involved one of the toy animatronics biting Jeremy Fitzgerald during a day shift at a birthday party, resulted in frontal lobe damage but survival, and led to the elimination of daytime free roam for animatronics. These are two distinct incidents, separated by time, location, victim, outcome, and animatronic involved, but sharing the common factor of showing how Fazbear Entertainment's negligence repeatedly led to people getting hurt by supposedly entertaining robots. Impact on FNAF lore. The two bite incidents aren't just isolated tragedies in Five Nights at Freddy's history. They're foundational events that shape the entire franchise, influenced character motivations, drove plot developments, and established patterns of tragedy that would repeat across multiple games and locations. Understanding their impact means seeing how these moments rippled forward through the timeline, how they changed the company, affected the Afton family, contributed to the possession phenomenon and became reference points that other events were measured against. The bites matter not just for what they were, but for everything they set in motion. For the Afton family, the bite of 83 was a fracture point from which they never recovered. William lost his youngest son, though whether this pushed him toward his remnant experiments or simply accelerated existing obsessions remains debated. His promise through the Fredbear plush, "I will put you back together," became a driving motivation that could explain his later experiments with possession, his attempts to inject remnant into the fun-time animatronics, his broader quest to understand and manipulate the boundary between life and death. If that promise was genuine rather than manipulative, if William actually cared about resurrecting his son, then every terrible thing he did afterward carries that twisted justification. He was trying to save his child through increasingly horrific means. Michael Afton's guilt over killing his brother defined his character arc across the franchise. The nightmares of FNAF 4, those twisted, monstrous versions of the animatronics, could be Michael's subconscious punishment, his mind transforming the characters into the monsters his brother saw them as, replaying his trauma nightly. His later appearances working security at various locations, getting scooped by Enard, hunting his father's trail, all of it could stem from that foundational guilt. He's seeking atonement, trying to understand what happened to his brother's spirit, attempting to undo or at least comprehend the consequences of his teenage cruelty. The crying child's death set Michael on a path that would eventually lead to confronting his father and burning down the final pizzeria, coming full circle from the boy who caused a tragedy to the man who helped end the cycle. For Fazbear Entertainment as a company, both bites represented PR disasters that forced operational changes without actually addressing root problems. After 83, they rebranded from Fredbears to Freddy's, moved away from springlock technology as the primary attraction, expanded to multiple locations to dilute the impact of any single incident. After 87, they banned daytime free roam, scrapped the expensive toy animatronics, tightened restrictions on how animatronics could interact with guests. But neither incident made them question whether their entire business model was sustainable, whether entertainment venues featuring powerful mechanical performers were simply too dangerous to operate regardless of safety measures. The pattern both bites established, of tragedy followed by closure, followed by reopening under slightly different circumstances, became the franchise's signature cycle. Every FNAF game features a location that's either about to close, recently reopened after previous incidents, or operating in the shadow of past failures. The bites taught the company that they could survive disasters if they managed them correctly, contained them to individual locations, controlled the narrative enough to prevent complete brand collapse. This lesson made them more resilient, but also more dangerous, creating a company that accepted tragedy as a cost of doing business, rather than a sign that fundamental changes were needed. The bites contributed significantly to the franchise's possession phenomenon, the way dead children's spirits inhabited animatronics and drove their aggressive behavior. The crying child potentially became Golden Freddy, or influenced other supernatural elements, his death feeding into the growing collection of trapped souls seeking revenge or simply existing in confused limbo. Jeremy Fitzgerald survived his bite, but the trauma and blood and suffering at a location where the puppet and withered animatronics already carried possessions added to the spiritual resonance. Places where people died or suffered horribly became magnets for supernatural activity in FNAF lore, and both bite locations carried that weight. William Afton's murders, the missing children incident that became central to the franchise, happened in the gap between the two bites. His methods of luring children away and stuffing their bodies into animatronics created possessions that made the machines dangerous beyond their mechanical capabilities. The bite of 87 might have had supernatural components if the responsible toy animatronic was influenced by nearby possessions, if the withered animatronics in storage extended their malevolent presence to the new performers, if the location itself was tainted by the murders William had committed. The bites and the possessions are interconnected, each feeding into and amplifying the other, creating restaurants where both mechanical failure and spiritual vengeance pose threats. The springlock technology that caused the bite of 83 would eventually claim William Afton himself when he died inside the spring Bonnie suit, crushed by the same mechanisms that had killed the crying child 4 years earlier. This cyclical justice, William destroyed by his own dangerous innovations, tied his fate directly to his son's death. If Fredbear's springlock jaws could kill a child, Spring Bonnie's could kill William, and both deaths involve springlock mechanisms failing under moisture conditions and closing with fatal force. The technology that seemed innovative became a recurring source of tragedy, claiming multiple victims across different years before being completely decommissioned. Henry Emily's role in both incidents, as the creator of springlock technology and co-owner of Fazbear Entertainment, burdened him with responsibility that he would eventually try to address in Pizzeria Simulator. His decision to burn everything down, to trap the possessed animatronics and destroy them permanently, to finally end the cycle of tragedy his innovations had enabled, stemmed from accumulated guilt over every person hurt by his creations. The crying child's death should have been his wake-up call. The bite of 87 should have confirmed that the problems were systemic. But it took decades of additional suffering before Henry finally acknowledged that his mechanical marvels had caused too much harm to be allowed to continue. Both bites became in-universe legends, incidents that employees knew about and referenced. Phone Guy's casual mention of the 87 bite suggests it was common knowledge among Fazbear Entertainment workers, a cautionary tale about what could happen, a reason for certain policies existing. The 83 bite, while more covered up, would have been known to people like Henry and William who were there, who witnessed the fallout, who carried that knowledge forward even as the company tried to bury it. These weren't just events in the game's plot. They were historical moments within the FNAF universe, shaping how characters understood their world and what dangers they faced. The bites also established FNAF's core horror concept. Innocent entertainment gone wrong, childhood joy corrupted into trauma, places that should be safe, becoming dangerous. Every subsequent game built on this foundation. Animatronics weren't inherently evil in most cases. They were machines meant to entertain children that became weapons through malfunction, possession, or misuse. The bites embodied this perfectly, showing how easily entertainment could transform into horror, how thin the line was between mechanical performance and mechanical violence, how the same jaws that smiled for children could destroy them. For players and the community, the bites became reference points for understanding the franchise's themes and timeline. Any theory about FNAF's chronology had to account for both incidents, place them correctly, explain their connections to surrounding events. Any analysis of the Afton family had to address Michael's guilt and William's possible motivations stemming from his son's death. Any discussion of Fazbear Entertainment's negligence pointed to the bites as prime examples of the company's failures. The incidents achieved legendary status, not just within the FNAF universe, but within the community analyzing it, becoming touchstones that appeared in countless theory videos, timeline documents, and lore discussions. The separation of the two bites, the realization that there were two distinct incidents rather than one, represented a crucial evolution in community understanding of how Scott Cawthon told stories. It taught players to look for small details, to question assumptions, to accept that the narrative was more complex than it initially appeared. This lesson prepared the community for later revelations, for understanding the mimic as separate from Afton, for separating book canon from game canon while acknowledging parallels, for accepting that FNAF lore required careful attention and willingness to revise theories as new evidence emerged. Both bites ultimately serve as reminders that FNAF's horror isn't just about jump scares and haunted animatronics. It's about human failure, about the consequences of prioritizing profit over safety, about how trauma echoes through families and companies and communities. It's about children dying in places built for their enjoyment, about adults failing to protect them or actively causing their harm, about technology meant to bring joy instead bringing suffering. The Bite of 83 and the Bite of 87 embody all these themes, making them central to understanding not just what happened in FNAF's timeline, but what the franchise is fundamentally about. Conclusion: 2 bites, 1 haunted legacy. We've traced 2 tragedies separated by 4 years and hundreds of miles of narrative thread, followed their evidence trails through multiple games, examined their victims and circumstances and consequences, separated fact from speculation, and confirmed timeline from community confusion. The Bite of 83 and the Bite of 87, 2 incidents that were once believed to be one, now stand clearly distinguished as separate moments in Fazbear Entertainment's history of turning family entertainment into trauma. But perhaps more importantly, we've seen how these incidents connect, how they reveal patterns, how they demonstrate that the problems underlying both bites were never truly addressed, despite closures and policy changes and years of supposed learning. What we know with certainty bears repeating as we close. In 1983, at Fredbear's family diner, a child we know as the crying child died after Michael Afton and his friends placed his head in Fredbear's mouth, triggering springlock mechanisms that crushed his skull and destroyed his frontal lobe. The incident was witnessed by many guests, led to the immediate and permanent closure of the diner, and shattered the Afton family in ways that would echo through William's later crimes and Michael's guilt-driven quest for atonement. The television screen showing Fredbear and Friends 1983 confirms the date. Help Wanted's Easter egg reinforces its significance, and the FNAF 4 minigames show us the tragedy in heartbreaking detail. What happened to the child's soul afterward remains a matter of interpretation, with connections to Golden Freddy being one of the prevailing theories among the community. In November 1987, at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, the widely accepted theory identifies Jeremy Fitzgerald as the victim who worked a day shift during a birthday party and was bitten by one of the toy animatronics, suffering severe frontal lobe damage but surviving the attack. Phone Guy's mention in FNAF 1 establishes the incident. The paycheck dates place it in 1987. The circumstances suggested by Night 6's phone call align with what we can piece together. The culprit's identity remains uncertain, with Mangle and Toy Chica being the strongest suspects based on attack patterns and later hints. But the incident itself is confirmed through multiple pieces of evidence across several games. The bite led to the elimination of daytime animatronic free roam and contributed to the location's closure. These weren't random accidents. They were inevitable results of a company that repeatedly chose innovation and profit over human safety, that treated dangerous technology as acceptable risk, that covered up problems rather than solving them. The springlock suits that made Fredbear special were known to be dangerous, documented in training tapes as requiring extreme caution, but were used anyway because they provided entertainment value. The toy animatronics demonstrated aggressive behavior towards staff for days before the party, showed signs of malfunction, yet the company scheduled a birthday party with children present and required an employee to stand close to these malfunctioning machines as his job duty. Both incidents show Fazbear Entertainment following the same playbook: operate until tragedy strikes, shut down the specific location, implement minimal changes to appear responsive, reopen elsewhere under slightly different branding, repeat the cycle. They never asked whether animatronics with powerful jaws should be used in children's entertainment. They never seriously considered that their entire business model was built on accepting that sometimes people would die for the sake of profit. They learned to manage disasters, not prevent them, to control narratives rather than eliminate dangers. The community's journey to understanding these two bites mirrors the broader experience of engaging with FNAF lore. Initial assumptions based on limited information gave way to revelations that complicated the picture, that showed the story was deeper than it first appeared. The confusion around "was that the bite of 87?" became a learning moment, teaching players to pay attention to details, to question assumptions, to wait for complete evidence before drawing conclusions. This pattern of mysterious setup, community speculation, eventual revelation through careful evidence analysis has defined how Scott Cawthon tells stories and how the FNAF community engages with them. What remains uncertain doesn't undermine what we've established. We may never have definitive confirmation of which toy animatronic bit Jeremy. We might not ever learn the crying child's name or his exact spiritual fate after death, the specific details of how many people witnessed each bite, what exactly the company told investigators, how long Jeremy survived and with what quality of life. These gaps exist and may never be filled, but they don't need to be for us to understand the fundamental truth. Two separate bite incidents occurred, both caused by Fazbear Entertainment's negligence, both preventable, both tragic in different ways. The bites matter because they demonstrate consequences in a franchise often focused on supernatural elements and complex lore. Amid all the possession and remnant and spiritual mysteries, the bites ground the story in physical harm, in recognizable tragedy, in the simple equation of dangerous machines plus vulnerable humans equals disaster. They show that before William Afton's murders corrupted everything, before spirits inhabited animatronics and supernatural events became commonplace, there was just a company making unsafe entertainment devices and people getting hurt because of it. For those of you who've stayed with us through this entire exploration, who've listened to the evidence and analysis and timeline construction, thank you for your attention. Whether you're a long-time FNAF theorist who knew most of this already and simply enjoyed hearing it compiled, or a newer fan finally getting clarity on incidents you'd heard referenced but never fully understood, or someone using this as sleep audio who absorbed details in that space between waking and dreaming, I hope this journey through tragedy has been illuminating without being so disturbing. It defeats the purpose of a calm, nighttime listen. The Bite of 83 and The Bite of 87 stand as bookends to a crucial period in Fazbear Entertainment's history, the years when the company expanded from a single diner into a chain, when William Afton's crimes began, when possessions started, when springlock suits were retired, when patterns of negligence and tragedy were established that would define the franchise. Understanding these bites means understanding the foundation everything else was built on, the original sins that would haunt the company through decades of additional incidents until Henry Emily finally burned it all down in a desperate attempt to end the cycle. As we close, remember that in the FNAF universe, these weren't just plot points. They were real tragedies to the characters who lived through them. Children died or were permanently damaged. Families were destroyed. Workers were put in impossible situations. The horror of Five Nights at Freddy's isn't really about haunted robots. It's about human failure, about adults failing children, about companies prioritizing wrong things, about how easily innocence can be corrupted when profit matters more than people. If you've enjoyed this exploration into FNAF lore, if this deep dive into the two bite incidents has helped you understand the franchise better, or simply provided companionship through a quiet evening or overnight hours, please consider liking and subscribing to Night Mode Lore. We'll continue bringing you detailed, research-backed explorations of Five Nights at Freddy's and other franchises, always presented in this calm, thorough style designed for learning or sleeping, or simply letting the narrative carry you through the hours when the rest of the world is still. Thank you for listening. Rest well, dream carefully, and remember that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't supernatural at all. They're simply the predictable results of people who knew better but chose profit anyway. The Bite of 83 and the Bite of 87 haunt Fazbear Entertainment's history, not because they were mysterious or inexplicable, but because they were exactly what anyone paying attention should have expected. And that's perhaps the most unsettling truth of all.